If you haven't been doing buying groups with ABM, then you haven't been doing ABM, right? Buying groups is an integral part of your whole stakeholder mapping at the whole beginning of the process. If you don't get that right, you haven't got ABM right, and your foundations will crumble as you start to build out the program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest in the award-winning OnBase podcast series. I'm your host, Paul Gibson. And as you know, we always look for topics that are hot today and things that we're going to discuss that mean something to everyone. And today's no exception. I'm excited that I'm talking with Declan Mulkeen, CMO at Strategic ABM. And he's with us today to discuss what I think is something really relevant: modern ABM, evolving strategies with AI, buying groups, and outcome-based models. Declan, really excited to get into this with you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the topic of today's podcast, I always like to start with a simple question, Declan. You've built a career at the intersection of brand and go-to-market strategies, and you've been at the forefront of ABM strategy for many years. And I'm sure many of the listeners will already be following you on things like LinkedIn. But do you mind sharing your journey to where you are today and what led you to focus so much on modernizing ABM frameworks?
That's a good question to start with. Thanks, Paul, for that. Well, I've been involved in sales and marketing for more than 30 years. And I think if I actually went back in time even further into my days running a pub in Ireland when I was 10, I've always been listening to customers and trying to, serve them what they're looking to actually have, right? So I think I've always been involved in that kind of front of house side of the world, really, whether it's been in sales, whether it's been in hospitality in my youth. I used to run an Italian restaurant in New Jersey for a couple of years way back. So that kind of being in front of people, being in front of the camera, being in front of an audience has always been something very, very easy for me. And I think the sales is where I really started, actually. I started in sales, actually, before I went into marketing. And then I'm based in Spain now, as you know, and I went to business school here many years ago. And then from there moved into marketing, first of all, within the fashion sector in Barcelona, and then moved back into the UK, worked in professional services, worked in educational technology, running sales teams, running marketing teams. And the agency where I work now, where I'm the CMO, Strategic ABM, they were my agency for 15, 16 years at a couple of different companies. And just the opportunity arose to come and join them to kind of spearhead their marketing and to kind of, push forward a little bit our agenda around what we think good ABM looks like. And that's been about 6 years now, I think. So probably a lot of people have seen me probably more active in the last 5 or 6 years than my previous lifetimes and my previous roles. But I think that kind of coincides with how LinkedIn and other social media channels have kind of risen to the fore, really. But that's kind of like a bit of a shortened version of my career.
Yeah, I think there's a podcast on its own of you running a pub at 10. We'll definitely revisit
well,
that.
My mum and dad used to go over to their hometown, and obviously my auntie had a pub, and she'd go for a drink in the village in one of the 22, 25 pubs that used to be in the village, and she'd leave me and my cousin running the pub. And we were only 10, but nobody ever asked questions back then in the 1970s. So
Exactly.
We just used to eat loads of crisps and drink loads of Coca-Cola and stuff, and we were very happy.
Yeah, fantastic. And the odd pint of Guinness, no doubt.
Yeah, eventually that came along, yeah.
Awesome. And I think that sales background is really important as well, because we speak to so many people about that sales and marketing alignment. So having a bit of both is really important. So what do you think was the turning point, I suppose is the right way to look at it, that made you realize traditional ABM models needed to evolve into something a bit more maybe outcome focused?
I mean, that's a good question. I think, obviously ABM has been around for 22, 23 years from the days of Unisys and Accenture, and obviously Bev Burgess and the team over at ITSMA kind of built the methodology around it. And that was fine for 20 years, I think, those kind of models. And I think that kind of whole thing about, is it one-to-one, is it one-to-few, is it one-to-many, those kind of models people got very comfortable with. And that was the kind of the general parlance that people would use to describe them. But I think ultimately, when you talk to customers, I did a post about this the other day on LinkedIn and it went down really well. I have never had a conversation with any customer or potential customer and they said, hey, we want to run a one-to-few program, or we want to run a one-to-one program, or we want to run a blended one-to-many, one-to-few. Not once, ever, has anybody ever asked me that. They basically come to me, or come to us rather, as an agency and say, we've got this problem. And so they describe the problem, and it's our job to interpret that problem and see whether or not ABM, A, is the right fit, and B, what does that look like in reality on the ground? So we just came to the kind of the dawning realization that talking about models wasn't really the way to talk about ABM. Trying to apply that kind of methodology into a real business isn't really the way to do it, really. So that's why we've been talking to the market and obviously with our customers and with the general market, just talking about, what kind of outcome are you looking to achieve and how can we deliver something that actually meets that outcome, whether it's a go-to-market challenge around your net new, whether it's a go-to-market challenge around your existing customers. We built this whole kind of playbook methodology of about 40 different playbooks that we've got tried and tested and delivered in the market. And each one is almost like a complete suite of ABM, but just to meet that one outcome. So what happens when we're on a call with a CFO, a CEO, a COO, when the C-suite get involved, which very often happens now, their eyes light up because they're thinking, well, thank God that he's not talking about bloody marketing again, because even though they might have a marketing background or at least understand marketing, they don't want to hear all this kind of, impressions and clicks and CTAs and all this nonsense. They're not interested. They want to see how you're going to solve my problem. What are you going to do? What does it look like? How much is it going to cost? How are you going to measure the results? And how do we change as the market changes? And so I think that's really been our message to the market, and it seems to be landing very well.
Yeah, and it's really nice to hear because I don't think any of the team over here talk ABM. We do ABM, but we never talk it. To your point, it's all around, well, what are you trying to solve? Okay, this is how we can help you solve it. So that's always good to hear. And in your time at Strategic ABM, has that shaped your perspective on, everyone talks about it now, right? AI, but also buying groups, which is becoming a big topic in ABM.
Well, with regards to AI, I suppose, AI is currently, it's funny, isn't it? It's been around for about 2 years in the current guise with obviously the launch of ChatGPT and all the rest of them. And it feels like it's been around forever. I read this study the other day saying it's actually affecting the way we think, actually. It's actually detrimental to our own creativity or overuse of AI tools. So I think that we'll eventually have to kind of get some kind of pill to take to kind of get ourselves back to where we were before. But I think AI in ABM, we did a LinkedIn Live actually the other day on this very subject, and we were showing how we have infused or enabled the whole ABM journey to actually allow AI to accelerate many of the elements that people would maybe traditionally do with other platforms, with other programs, manually mixing, etc. So I think we always talk about human first, AI fast. And I think because ABM is all about the customer and about being customer centric, you can't ever lose track of that. That's your North Star, is what are you doing to be customer centric? What are you doing to be account centric? What are you doing to actually deliver on that outcome you're looking to achieve? And then the AI element is, well, okay, fine. How can that actually help you do that a better job, but not necessarily just a quicker job? It's not always about being quicker. It's actually about delivering the right message into the customer, into the market. And I think with regards to buying groups, I saw something the other day that somebody said ABM is dead. It's now time to call it account-based buying groups or something. And I just had to blow them out the water and say, come on, guys. If you haven't been doing buying groups with ABM, then you haven't been doing ABM, right? Buying groups is an integral part of your whole stakeholder mapping at the whole beginning of the process. If you don't get that right, you haven't got ABM right, and your foundations will crumble as you start to build out the program. So I think there's a whole movement now, and it's like everything comes along and some flavor of the month and then it goes away. So a lot of people are talking about buying groups, but it's just been an integral part of every single ABM program I've ever seen, really, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting one because to your point, buying groups is the way you should always have been doing it, right? Because focusing on anyone else doesn't make any sense. I think what I'm seeing, or what we're seeing in the market, is lots of people jumping on that bandwagon saying, hey, we can identify the buying group. Great. But then it's how they act on it, right? It's one thing knowing that buying group, but all you're going to do then is just say, here's the buying group. They are sales, go after it. You're missing the point. The point is you're supposed to understand why that buying group's so important. The relationship with your brand is today. Do they even know who you are? If you identify a buying group, that's not as simple as saying pass it over to sales. Lots of intricacies, and I think that will come out in the wash. There'll be a lot of people who'll go, yeah, well, okay, great, you can identify a buying group, but that's not what we're trying to do here. Anyway, again, buying groups is another topic we can do for another day, I'm convinced. So if you think about the traditional ABM models, they often focus on frameworks, processes. So in your view, when you talk about modern outcome-based ABM strategies, what does that look like, and how is it different from the traditional frameworks?
Well, I suppose in simple terms, kind of working backwards as opposed to working forwards. So rather than applying a framework to a situation or a problem, you actually work backwards and say, well, what is the problem? Let's work backwards to build the answer that will meet that problem. With the 40 odd playbooks that we developed, if you think about a map, which goes from everything from net new awareness all the way across to customer growth advocacy, we've basically built about 40 odd playbooks that answer individual outcomes, whether it's raising awareness at the very beginning of the journey, whether it's defending against competitors, whether it's building advocacy, whether it's kind of cross-selling into an existing account or upselling to an existing account. We basically, I do a lot of sales calls because I think it's the way that I can learn the most about what's actually happening, and then that can frame a lot of the marketing that I like to do. But I've just been on 2 or 3 calls this week, and it's only Tuesday morning, and each call is the same. They explain to me the problem they're facing. Yesterday, we had one about a company that was looking to try to go back to its roots somewhat of its key account management roots, where it was actually creating great relationships, large accounts, high value, strong relationships, customers for life. And they'd found that over time, by applying marketing, they were actually becoming too transactional, and they were actually onboarding too many customers. And it turned out that they weren't the right kind of customers. So they were saying to us, well, look, we need to go back to our roots. How can we use ABM to actually win companies that look like our key accounts? So that was the challenge that they set us, is, okay, we need to win these customers in this sector, in this industry. We know who they are. They know us more or less, but our challenge is to get in there, talk to the right people. Don't go just surface level, which is going back to your point about the buying groups, and trying to build a story within there with a value proposition that actually lands with impact. So in that example there, it was, how can we win new key accounts is the outcome. And then we work backwards from there to apply our models and our commercial models to that. And that can be everything from the basics that you know very well, Paul, around obviously the foundational work, which obviously is a given for everybody doing ABM, whether it's the ICP, the account selection, the prioritization, the tiering, et cetera, et cetera. But then obviously we spend an awful lot of work on the value proposition. That's probably one of the sweet spots of our agency is building compelling value propositions that actually land. And then they get rolled out into the whole campaign, the digital experience, the physical experience, the online experience, the offline experience. And then that gets played into the account, into the key people. And we always like to talk about ABM. I always say that ABM is not about personas, it's about people. And I always say that if you can't name me the people in the account, then you're not doing ABM. So whenever I hear people talk about, this is the persona we're after, or that one or the other one, I say, well, that's demand gen. If you want to do ABM, tell me their names. And an old guest on my show, Danny Nail, who's one of the kind of gurus for me of ABM, he used to say, if you don't know their names, you're not doing ABM. And I think that's, for me, is a little mantra that I've always got in my head, is know your customer, know your prospect, know them by their first and surname, and then you're doing proper ABM.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And going back to that key account point, I think that's so important. And it's not just because it helps you to win the right deals. You think about the ripple effect. If you're in marketing and you're targeting and chasing and engaging with companies that aren't a great fit, probably means you might even get some good results, as in you're getting some of those companies into pipeline, and sales will close some of them, whether they're a good fit or not, but they'll miss a load and that'll affect your close rates. But then down the line, you're actually giving the post-sales team an account that isn't a great fit. The chances of delivering true value is very little, and therefore they're likely to churn. We're all, anyone in business, if you can't keep a customer beyond the first 12, 24 months, you're going to lose money on it. So it's a whole ripple effect. I think you're right. I think that focus on the right account is more important than people give it credibility for. And again, that account-based approach is the key part of it.
Yeah, just to add one point to that, Paul, I always remember things that people tell me, and I can kind of stay with me forever. An old chairman of an old company I used to work for, he said, Declan, anybody can be a busy fool. And this guy was a multimillionaire. He'd ran, some serious companies in his time. And he just said, look, you've got to focus on what's important for your company, and just everything, all these kind of small transactional stuff is of no importance whatsoever. And you need to forget about those and focus on the large accounts and get more of them. And I think I might be answering a potential question you might want to answer later, but with regards to ROI, we always say, obviously we've been applying the 3Rs methodology, which many people have been using over the years, reputation, relationship, and revenue. But the one that we see is coming more to the fore now is about lifetime value, LTV. And that's a reflection of the fact that, boards of companies, shareholders, C-suite, they're all focused on the lifetime value, because that is actually what's going to drive the most profitable businesses, is having customers that stay with you forever. I was interviewing, I think it's Andrew Watkins over at IBM, who runs the part of their ABM program in the UK. And I think he was saying on the program that I think American Express has been a client of IBM for over 100 years. That's an example of a customer for life. So if you can imagine the relationship between American Express and IBM over the course of 100 years, that just shows you that if you do a good job for a company, and as imagine what American Express was like 100 years ago, and imagine what IBM was like 100 years ago, and now what each company is like now, they've been able to partner over that period. So that's really important for me.
Yeah, it really is. And I think similar to you, speak to people all the time around on these subjects, and it's amazing how many people spend a lot of time and effort identifying those key accounts. Who are we going to go after? And then do advertising campaigns that are like spray and pray and advertise to anyone and everyone and hope that some of those key accounts actually see the ads. And to me, it's just like, you don't need to do it that way anymore. But anyway, again, diversifying off a topic. But I think if you're going to take that effort and focus on those key accounts, do it across the entire go-to-market motion.
Agreed.
We touched on AI, and I think it's a subject that is so valid. And I agree with you that we've got to be careful that we do it in the right way. But it seems to be transforming marketing. So from your perspective, how do you see AI and all this discussion around AI agents reshaping these ABM strategies we're talking about, especially when you think about things like personalization and scalability?
That's a big question there, Paul. That's a big question. Well, I've seen a lot of focus a lot of people have been thinking about the whole kind of agent or the agentic route. And I think even one thing I've definitely found, we run a kind of a quarterly event for our customers, and where we kind of present to them the latest thinking on AI, ABM or AI. And we did a session on AI not too long ago, and it was really interesting. These are super interesting companies, all of all shapes and sizes, from the biggest, high street names down to kind of more bespoke, technology brands. And what was interesting was that everyone is trying it, but no one really knows what to do necessarily. It's a little bit like that kind of old, and that old kind of expression about, teenage sex, right? Everyone's talking about it, but nobody knows how to do it. And AI is very similar. And there's a limitation there with regards to the tools and the governance and the compliance and the legalities in each company. And we were very surprised to hear that, because Microsoft is so embedded in so many companies, that most companies that we were talking to were only able to actually access Copilot, which is obviously the Microsoft. So there's a limit. I'm definitely seeing there's a limitation. There's almost like there's a bit of a pressure cooker sense, is that the demand is there. There's a lot of pressure, but people are feeling they're kind of constrained somewhere, either by their companies, by their CTOs, by the legal side of things, that they're very worried about what to do and how to do it and what information you can put in there, and how's the information controlled when you put in company proprietary information or customer proprietary information. So I think that's something that we've been talking to a lot of our customers about, is how to think about that and how to think about some of the issues that surround that, so you can actually benefit from AI. So that's just an aside observation that I've seen in the market. But I think in terms of how we're training, and we've just recently launched a whole suite of AI training courses that kind of the ABM mastery, they're kind of linked to the whole ABM journey. So there's one course for each step of our 6-step approach, whether it's ICP, account selection, value proposition, the creative side, etc., the personalization side, as you said. And I think what we're trying to show there is the art of the possible. We're trying to show you're doing this today, and you're doing a good job at doing your ICP or your account selection, or you're adding new accounts to your ABM program, or you're promoting, demoting accounts based on insights, first party or third party. But here are some ways to actually infuse that process with AI. So the LinkedIn Live that I mentioned, Paul, we did the other day, we gave 3 case studies, and we kind of demonstrated the 3 live on the LinkedIn Live. And one was regarding account selection and how you can get kind of that raw metadata of all the accounts that you're either working with or you'd like to work with or whatever. And then you can use AI to actually do a lot of scoring, and a lot of the heavy lifting that you were talking about before can now be done with AI. So it kind of gives you the 80%. And a lot of what we talk about when we talk about AI is give us the 80%, but the 20% is going to be me. because that's what makes the difference. That's what the customer is paying for. They're not paying for an AI. They're paying for your expertise, your knowledge, your ability to do great ABM, to accelerate what they're trying to do. So I think that's the part from us. The account selection, the insights, which obviously is something that a lot of companies sometimes skip over. The use case we showed, it's worth if you drop it into the call notes for this podcast, but my colleague Josh showed how you could build very sophisticated insights on one company by combining different AI tools together and giving you something that you can then human validate, but gives you a massive head start and actually gives you angles that perhaps, and I think that's what, if you think about insights, what it's all about, it's trying to give you angles that you wouldn't necessarily see. So it's almost like looking over the horizon, because the horizon, we can't see what's behind the horizon, but sometimes with insights, you can see what's behind the horizon. So it's getting those insights that then become part of the value proposition, that then become part of the campaign, part of the messaging, that then make the customer or the prospect actually, sit up, stop, read, act. And I think that's for me where AI is going to help, is actually helping us, helping our clients, is just to accelerate some of that work and then get into that 80%.
Yeah, great points again. And I think that insight is a critical thing. We're actually starting to hear when we speak marketing, but a lot of this is from the sales side of people we speak to, losing a little bit of confidence in AI, which we're actually saying only a couple of years in. That's a bit dangerous. But a lot of it is around this black box approach to AI, like saying AI is telling you to do this, so do it. But there's no insight. There's no giving you an understanding of why. And I always call it AI without the why. And it's like, hey, salesperson, go after this account because I say so. Well, I'll go after it. And then you realize that 50% of the time it's irrelevant. You start losing faith in that. What you want to know is, okay, I'll go after that account, but why should I go after it? What messaging are they showing? Are they engaging with our brand? Where are they on our buyer journey? Is it actually a sales play, or should I be raising awareness? Is this a nurture to let them know who we are because they're searching, but they're not looking at us? So I think AI massively has a future, right? And I can see AI being, okay, I need to do this really manual, time-consuming task. AI do it for me so I can focus on what I do, which is the creative or the selling or whatever. And that, I think, has a huge future. And I think that's where AI will take us, all those manually intensive tasks. But we have to be careful that we're not just throwing AI stuff out there and then switching off the people who are using it, because then they'll lose confidence and that will really affect AI's approach in the future, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. A lot of people say that, AI is amazing at looking at the past, but it can't look at the present to look at the future. And although I saw a podcast yesterday with Sam Altman and a whole bunch of his nerdy team, and they were talking about how they are getting it to look at the future and predict the future, which is a bit kind of scary. So that if they've made that public, it suggests they're going to actually do something about it. But that's an interesting point. But I think going back to your point, Paul, about, how do you use AI within the ABM world? I think one thing that we're looking at is, and go back to your point around, well, what does that new ABM model look like? And what we're definitely saying to the market is, previously you went to an agency, and obviously I've used agencies for 25 years, and I'm working with an agency now. So I've been on the dark side and I've been on the bright side, so to speak, of the two things, right? So I know what it looks like to hire an agency, to manage them, and obviously now I'm on the other side trying to convince people to use an agency. But I've definitely seen a movement in the kind of whole ABM agency world where people are saying, well, AI is helping us to do certain parts of this, so perhaps you need to do other parts of it. So we're definitely seeing a kind of a request from our customers to kind of go a little bit up market, so to speak, a little bit upscale, going deeper and deeper into the kind of the value proposition, into the insights, into the campaign messaging, into the strategy. Because I think ultimately AI can't replace a great ABM strategist. And I think another thing that we've been working on a lot, obviously two things I've mentioned about the training, which we think is really important to get. We've trained so many people over the last decade without actually having a formalized training program in place. And we've been delivering training all the time. And then suddenly people said to us, well, could you formalize it? So that's why we've launched a training suite. And equally, people are saying to us, well, we'd love to have, your expertise, but could we subscribe to it? And so we've been working on that as well in kind of a model to say, well, actually, there is a way with AI now where you can get access to this kind of decades of marketing expertise, etc. And we can make that available. That's something that we're kind of cooking up at the moment, is to make our kind of expertise available to the market in a way that helps people, rather than just, as you said, just going to a black box and just talking to a black box that you don't know where that information is coming from. You don't know whether it's right or incorrect. You know, I've done so many experiments and typed things into various platforms and see, you know, the stuff that comes back, and some of it's okay and some of it is very dodgy because it's looking for these citations. And the worst thing now is everyone's trying to game the citations, and everyone's trying to do this GEO, right? Which is obviously the AI version of SEO. So now you've got, it's like going back to the 1990s when people were doing keyword stuffing and, you know, putting the word, you know, whatever, B2B marketing 50 times on a page, and you got away with that for a couple of years. Now people are doing the same thing, and they're trying to, you know, spend half their day on Reddit and the other half day on Wikipedia to make sure that the AIs pick up those citations. So, you know, pinch of salt really is what I say when you put a question into AI at the moment, because you just got to be very clear on the citation and where they're getting their data from, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did hear an example from a client who said that they were given a buying signal from AI, and when they dug into it with the client had unsubscribed from an email, and that was seen as a buying signal. Wow. Okay. We need to be careful, right?
Well, I always give the anecdote that, you know, I've got 2 kids and a dog downstairs. And so I've got a Toyota Versa, which is a 7-seater. And it's, you know, it's as dirty as you can imagine inside. You know, I've just gone beyond the kind of trying to clean the thing. It's gone beyond it. People, I say to people to clean, and they just say, I'm not cleaning that anymore. But I'm always on the website of Volvo because I just love Volvos. And I'm always looking at the XC60 and the XC90. So if people look at my interest, they think I'm actually really interested in buying a Volvo, but I haven't got 80,000 euros or dollars or whatever they cost to buy. But I've got a lot of interest, but I've got zero intent. And I mentioned Danny Nail before, who's was running things at Microsoft and Salesforce for ABM. And that's another thing that always stays in my head. He says, you've got to be very clear. There's a huge difference between interest and intent. And that's why my Volvo anecdote is one I tell everyone now to remember, that I've got a Toyota downstairs. It's going to stay there. Well, 2 reasons. One, because it does the job. And 2, I'd probably cry if I had a brand new Volvo and I had my 2 kids and the dog in the back. I'd probably have an attack of, you know, of nerves, knowing what they were going to do to the car. But anyway, so that's just an example.
Yeah, very good example as well. And I know we've touched on the buying groups, and we all both agree that it's something that should have been done from day one, but it is the big topic at the moment alongside our. How do you think anyone looking at ABM strategy should adapt their thinking to make sure, if they're not, they're effectively engaging with these groups?
Well, it goes back down to what we call the foundational work. With every customer, we kind of audit where they are on the journey, whether from their ICP to their account selection to their audiences within those accounts. And we peel away rather from them everything they know about those customers or those prospects. And just thinking about a conversation with another prospect that we were talking to the other day, and they were saying to me, we've got these huge accounts and they're spending more than $1 million with us, but we don't really know anybody. It's completely surface level. And so on the one hand, you look at the revenue and you think we're doing a really good job. But on the other hand, if anything happens to that account or that person, we are suddenly looking at $1 million potentially being at risk. So the whole conversation we had with them was about, you have to go deep into the account and you've got to build those relationships and build that influence within the account. So that kind of stakeholder mapping. And if we were doing a screen share, I'd show you some examples of how we do stakeholder mapping, but we go to a lot of effort and a lot of expense to kind of map out who we believe is the talking to sales, talking to account management, talking to the C-suite. Who are the people in that account that actually matter? Whether procurement are involved, whether the CFO is involved because he or she has to sign off the budget, whether they're involved early, mid, or late in the decision-making process. So I think just going to town and really building that map and then working out where you are with each one. Who does Paul know them? Does Declan know them? Does your CEO know the CEO? Where can you see those bridges? Because I think ultimately, the more that you can, and obviously it's interesting because there's now technology that can do this kind of multi-threading, right? And you can, at least from a technology point of view, you can try to serve up your content from a multi-threading point of view. And I think that's an interesting innovation, at least from a technology digital point of view, that allows you to do some of that. But ultimately, it's going to come down to great strategy, great messaging, getting into those. Very often with a lot of our ABM programs, we run a peer-to-peer model. So yes, sales do a marvelous job, but a CFO can sometimes do a better job, or a CTO can do a better job, or a CIO can do a better job, and they can build trust far quicker than your head of sales. So we run a lot of these peer-to-peer, whether it's through engagement, through these executive lunches or dinners, whether it's through when we run events or we piggyback rather off an event that they're running, a customer's running, or whether we're running social selling or what we call executive engagement programs into the account. And so, we're running with one of our customers, and he's kind of like the chief financial lead within the customer. And so he's part of the social selling program to build trust within the target accounts that they're talking to about, well, actually, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's got deep accountancy background. They're selling a financial services software. So therefore, there's much more reputation and trust building going on there. So I think that's really key, is actually just going to the expense of building those maps and then building out from there, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The fact is, we speak to sales leaders all the time that they've lost a deal because someone they never heard of came out of the woodwork and killed the deal because they didn't understand something about it. And so that multi-threading is so important. Regardless of who you're talking to and who you know, there's other people on that buying group that you're never going to engage with. You're never going to get to speak to. You need to be able to make sure that they're getting the same messaging. If they're doing stuff like anonymously looking at your website or researching stuff, make sure they're getting the same message. So I think, again, we're on the same page there. Buying groups is something we should always have done, but now more than ever, I think people are starting to sit up and go, oh, I didn't do that right. I really need to do it. And it's the people you don't know is as important as the people you do in that group, I think. Yeah. You mentioned ROI earlier, and that's something that comes up every time we have a conversation. But one of the things we hear is that many of the businesses speak to actually struggle to measure the success of their ABM efforts. Do you have any tips or metrics or outcomes you think these people should really be focusing on for that modern ABM approach?
Well, it depends. If you asked me the question maybe a year or so ago, I might have given you a different answer. But today, with what we're going to the market with in terms of outcome approach, it's a lot easier because we're delivering on the outcome. So rather than just being a more generic ABM program, hey, let's run a one-to-many campaign into a set of 100 accounts, or let's run a one-to-one campaign into 6 accounts. Yes, you can have metrics in terms of what you're looking to achieve, but ultimately they can be a little bit fuzzy. But with our outcomes approach, we're definitely saying, well, look, we're going to cross-sell into this account. Who do you know? Which divisions are you working with at the moment? What solutions are you selling into that account? So let's build an outcome-based approach around cross-selling and upselling. And then that's perfectly measurable. Because then you can say, right, this is what we were selling before. This is who we were selling to before. Let's look back 6 months and say, well, what changed? So I think that going back to what I was saying about talking the language of business as opposed to talking the language of marketing, that makes it a lot easier for everyone. And I think the second thing that I always say to people about ABM and ROI, and I just always think about my guests and what they shared with me. The Amber Bogey, who I interviewed, and she's a great ABM over in the States, she said to me, well, look, if you're doing ABM, well, everyone's rowing in the same direction, whether it's sales, whether it's customer success, whether it's the ABM team, whether it's B2B marketing, whether it's the C-suite, everyone's agreed that these are the accounts we have to go after. So it can be quite hard for you to peel off and say, well, that's ABM. That's the ABM team's work. But ultimately, if those accounts are spending more, delivering more, you've got higher, conversion rates, bigger deal values, you're seeing less churn, you've got higher scores in terms of, how they're scoring you for their satisfaction. If you're seeing all that across those accounts that you're doing ABM into as compared to maybe a test group that you're not doing ABM into, that means that ABM is working. How do you then say it's you rather than the sales team, rather than the C-suite, rather than customer success? That can be tough. So sometimes it's actually better. Yes, build your metrics, build your dashboard. As you would probably say, Paul, look at the average order value, the sales velocity, the win rates, the customer retention, customer churn. Look at all that, build that, absolutely. But then look at the whole thing as a more holistic model and say, well, are we all making this happen? Because then if you're all making it happen, then that's a perfect business because you're all, it's almost like, a family all, focused on the well-being of the family and making sure that everyone is looked after, and whether the youngest kid gets fed by the oldest son, and then the mother is busy in the kitchen and the father's trying to make sure one of the other children doesn't fall off the chair and kill himself. If you can make sure that everyone's pushing and rowing in the same direction, that's actually a good thing. So I think there are two parts to this. One is obviously or three parts rather. One is obviously the outcome focus that we talk about, which is much more tangible, much more measurable. The second one is looking at building that, which has to be a little bit manual. There's no perfect tool out there. There's some great tools, but you have to do a little bit of bringing stuff together because not everything is in one place. And then it's just trying to say to the whole business, well, these are the accounts. Do we all agree that these are the accounts? We do. Sales, are you on them? Yes. Customer success, are you on them? Yes. ABM, are you on them? Yes. Great. Well, let's look what happens. And then you will all celebrate together and go back to your point about kind of sales and marketing alignment earlier on. That's what brings alignment. When everyone's together and everyone says, well, Jesus, look at this. We've actually made it work. Then all those barriers come down and people aren't saying, ABM is from Mars and sales is from Venus or whichever planet,
Yeah, I sat in with a prospect, I won't name them, about a month ago, and it was a monthly meeting, and it was the CMO, the CRO, the CEO, the CFO, and I think the other one was called head of customer success, whatever, all in a room. And they're all defending their corners, and the CMO was saying how brilliant that they hit all their numbers, got in the right amount of leads, if people still talk like that they needed, they hit all their goals. And then sales was saying, the sales leader was saying, yeah, but most of the stuff you gave me was rubbish. My sales team can't close that. You're focused on the wrong things. But we did manage to close enough to hit our number. And then the customer success manager was saying, yeah, but you gave me a load of rubbish. These are going to churn. These aren't customers who work. And you could see the CEO and the CFO head in hands. And that is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve, right? We want them all to be marketing. We didn't give you as many leads this quarter, but every one of them was relevant. Yeah, we closed loads of them. Yeah, they're brilliant. We're going to renew them. That's the ideal, right? That's what we're all aiming for. And these approaches will definitely help that. There's probably going to be lots of listeners, Declan, who are still doing things a traditional way, the old traditional ABM frameworks, and are thinking, well, maybe I should look at a more modern approach. What is the first step you think they should take as they try to transition to this more outcomes-based approach?
Well, I think be very clear what outcome you're looking to achieve. So almost the more that you are aligned with the business, and if I think about the most successful ABM programs, the most successful ABM teams, they are the ones that are most aligned with the business, not just marketing, not just sales, but actually with the C-suite. And therefore, I'm just thinking of one that I was talking to the other day. This is, we're looking to do an ABM program with us, and they were saying, well, look, this is coming straight from the CEO. The CEO wants to deploy an account-centric approach to the business, and he wants it to be rolled out across the entire business because he understands from his previous companies the value of becoming account customer-centric. So that's almost like, the best gift any ABMer can receive is that message from the CEO that he wants the whole company to be account-centric. So ultimately, if you want to flip everything, you think, well, what is the outcome? What are the outcomes? What is the business looking to achieve? Whether from a net new point of view or from a customer growth point of view, what are they looking to achieve? How can I align my ABM strategy with those outcomes? So talking to sales about existing, depending on how each business is structured, but let's say sales are working much more on net new. So talking to sales about what they're trying to achieve, what's coming from the VP of sales and above on that. Talking to customer success or account management or account directors about what they're looking to achieve with accounts, and trying to mold that together to say, right, okay, well, here's how I'm going to help you this year. You've got some targets this year around retention. Well, let's build a strategy around retention. And, if the prize is big enough, which is normally where ABM sits in terms of, I was just thinking about another customer I spoke to last week, and their clients spend with them between $1 and $25 million, between $1 million and $25 million. So the prize is that big that unless you've actually got the team aligned around this, there's an awful lot of risk built into your model that if you lose a $1 to $25 million client, that's going to hurt you because it's going to be much harder to win another one. So I think just working backwards we always talk about working backwards from revenue. So work backwards from revenue in terms of what you're trying to achieve, build the program around that, build everything around that. And then once you've got that, then it's just a case of iterating, because then once you've done one, let's say it's around account retention, customer retention, then you can roll out another one, another playbook around perhaps rather cross-sell, upsell, or defending from a competitor or displacing a competitor, etc. So that would be my advice to anybody.
Yeah, some good advice. And you're right. So many people look at this as a buying new prospects approach. It's not. It's defending your existing customers as well, and making sure that you're getting the most value out of them you can, but also you're protecting them from the competition. So yeah, really good points. On that, do you have an example that you're able to share around a company that successfully even adopted that model approach and the outcomes they achieved?
Well, the one that we presented a couple of years ago now at the ABM conference in London was with a company called AVEVA, AVEVA, which is an industrial software company. I think they turn over about £1 billion or whatever that is in dollars these days, $1.2 billion, or I'm not sure the exchange rate at the moment. And that's a case study that the head of ABM there, Andrew Reid, presented in London. And I think that's a great story because that was a story of how do you run a playbook to change the perception of your brand. And this company, AVEVA, which is not really a high street name, in spite of the fact that it's got over $1 billion in turnover, had kind of acquired, this is a typical problem of many large companies, large enterprises. They'd acquired lots of companies and each company came with a brand. So their existing customers knew each one of these brands, but didn't know rather the holding company, didn't know the story, didn't know the trajectory, didn't know the kind of the modern story of this company. And that was the challenge they said to us is, hey, we're going to give you one account, GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, a well-known pharma company. And we need to run an ABM campaign into them to change perceptions, to get them to understand who AVEVA is as opposed to the legacy brand that they were working with, what it is that we can do for them, the whole suite of products and solutions that we've got because they're just buying one at the moment, and how we can actually kind of go hand in hand with them for the future. A little bit what I mentioned about IBM and American Express. And so, I mean, the results are on our website and everything, and you can Google it. It's on YouTube as well. But the net result was that they built about, going back to relationships and buying groups, they built about 45 relationships with key people that they never knew before within GSK, within one account, 45 key people that could actually be part of their that buying committee that they needed to talk to. And obviously GSK operates in 150, 180 countries across the globe. And they generated about $9 million in pipeline off the back of that one campaign, one strategy into one company. And then that then translated into the revenue thereafter. But I think the story was a story of transition. And I think going back to the outcome that they were looking for that transition. They were looking for that change of perception. They were looking for that customer to look at them in a different light. They were looking for that customer to see them as a modern company with multiple solutions to solve all their problems. And I think that's, when I see those transition stories, for me, they're great ones because it's not just about, we won this amount of business or whatever, but you actually helped me to transform my business. Those are really compelling ABM stories.
Yeah, it's a brilliant story. And AVEVA are continuing on leaps and bounds. They're also a Demandbase client, so we both work with them, which is good. That's
correct.
Last week, they just won the Forrester B2B Campaign of the Year, which is pretty impressive stuff as well. So,
it's good timing, actually. Good timing, because obviously we saw that, and obviously you're key to that success as well, really. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, it's great. Partnerships, look, it works. So looking ahead, do you see any particular trend? I know we've talked AI and buying groups, but any particular trend you see that are going to shape the future of ABM and what we do, and any advice to companies so they can prepare to stay ahead of that?
Well, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think what does it mean to you? Because everyone who's done ABM knows what it meant to them or means to them now, but what does ABM mean to you in the future? How is that going to be aligning with where your company's going to head? And that goes back to my point about, the companies are changing. It's scary how you look at all these very, large enterprises and how they're evolving very quickly. With the use of AI and various computing technologies that are allowing them to transform their businesses. They're not even recognizable compared to what they were like 5 years ago. So how can you remain relevant? And I think relevancy is probably one of the most important words that we use at our agency, is us remaining relevant for our customers in terms of how we can help them, and actually our customers remaining relevant in the market. So I think the kind of trending topic for me is this conversation of relevance. And I think another guest, I'm always talking about guests, but another guest I had was Christian Weiss, who's over at Autodesk in Germany. He's another skier like you, Paul. And he's down in Bavaria, so he's got access to some good slopes down there. And the way that he talks about ABM, he says, well, ABM is the customer is the Formula One car. In ABM, you and the whole company are everyone who is around that car trying to make it win. So when it comes into the paddock and there's somebody cleaning the windows, there's somebody changing the tires, there's somebody putting oil in the car, or gas, as the Americans call it. I've never understood why they call it gas when it's actually a liquid, but gas in the car. We are everyone around the car, and our job is to help the customer win. But that winning now is a lot more about relevancy, because ABM should be about helping your customer win. And that's, as an agency, us to our customers, and obviously our customers who are delivering ABM into their customers and into their prospects is helping them to remain relevant. So I think my message to the market is think about this relevancy and how you can make sure that that message gets across to your customers. And to go back to the point around AVEVA, they were trying to make sure that they were relevant to that customer that potentially could have, because they would have known the old brand and not the new brand. So I think that's a key message that I'm going to the market with at the moment.
And it's really interesting, because that is the word relevant on every conversation we have. If we're going to develop something new in the product, well, is it relevant to the market? And I'm going to take this activity with this particular prospect. Is it relevant? So it's great that you came up with that. And again, I'm aligned with you on that. I think relevancy is the key to everything. I'm going to buy that new piece of technology. Is it relevant to our business? Will it help solve those issues? So yeah, really, really good points there. Now, you sound like someone who consumes lots of content, and I know you have your own blog and things that you do there. Is there any books or blogs or podcasts you'd recommend to the listeners?
That's a tough one, really. There are so many great ones out there, so many great ones. Books, I've got a lot of books behind me. I just grabbed two I just thought you might ask that question. So I just grabbed two that are great reads. This one is from one of my guests. She runs ABM over at Snowflake, which is one of the kind of the best companies doing ABM at the moment. Hilary Carpio, Busting Silos. She wrote it in conjunction with the head of the CRO, Travis Henry. So if you want to learn how to build a winning GTM machine of sales and marketing, that's a great book. And this one is one of my favorites. And this is probably the most practical book I've got at home. This is a chap called Stu Heinecke, and he wrote this book called How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. He's a Wall Street cartoonist as part of his trade. He's been involved in advertising. You know, if you think about Mad Men, that kind of thing, he's that kind of generation. And he basically tells stories about campaigns that he ran to get meetings. And there are so many tangible examples about how you can do incredibly innovative, very, very cheap campaigns that actually make people react, whether it's sending a written note, whether, sending something in the post that lands, whether it's sending a painting. He talks about so many great examples that he's done, and also about the psychology of what it means to receive something. And I think if you think about what we try to do in ABM, a large part of what we do is try to get a meeting. And then from that meeting, then obviously sales can do their black magic. But that's what I would recommend to, and I've got another one here from my old friend Sangram Vajra, but I can't find it at the moment. But he's written so many books. And as you know, Sangram is doing some interesting stuff over at GTM Partners now. So he's always a good read as well.
Excellent. Great examples. Thank you very much for all of those. And you've been an awesome guest. I always knew you were going to be. I'm sure there's an argument for another follow-up, because I think we've only really just scratched the surface right now. A cheeky question. If you were to recommend 2 or 3 other inspirational people in the space you recommend we bring on the show, who would you call out? That's
going to be like asking me which one of my children is my favorite children. Exactly. I've interviewed about 85 guests so far, not as many as yourselves on your podcast, but about 85, I think. And I'd be hard picked to choose one, really. I think if you said to me, go and interview somebody, I would probably suggest a couple of people. One is a lady called Akriti Gupta, who, when I interviewed her, she was running ABM at Google Cloud. Now she's director of marketing at LinkedIn. She's quite a force. So I'd recommend speaking to Akriti. She's a real force of nature. And I would definitely recommend, and it's not fair really, because I'm just going to say this because it's just in front of me. I'm not saying it but I would definitely recommend talking to Hilary if you haven't talked to Hilary, because she's built something very special at Snowflake. And I think she's moved on from ABM now. I think she's got a wider GTM role, but she'd be a great guest. But like I said, it's like asking me about my children. That's very unfair of you, Paul.
No, it's a very, very fair response. And I appreciate that. And hopefully they could be future guests for us. So you've opened up lots of conversations. I'm sure there's lots of listeners who want to find out more about you and strategic ABM, etc. How would you recommend people best get in touch with you after this?
Well, to get in touch with me, my name is very Gaelic, Declan Mulkeen. So if you Google that, there's 2 of us. One is a very eminent doctor in the UK, And I'm sure he's a bit upset actually because he was always number one. And now I think I might become number one, but he's a very eminent doctor in the UK. So I'm the other one. So I'm the marketer, not the doctor. So if you Google my name, Declan, otherwise look at the agency, Strategic ABM, all one word. And we as you said, Paul, we're constantly sharing things on LinkedIn and other platforms, and we're running, lots of events and LinkedIn lives and stuff. So just look out for us really. And we'd love to see people and answer their questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Declan. That was a great session. I really enjoyed speaking with you. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I hope the listeners have enjoyed this episode. And don't forget, there's nearly 600 other episodes in the series now. So make sure you check them out. Thanks for listening. Thanks again, Declan, for your time. And until next time, cheerio.